Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jamie Bennett, and along with my colleague Susie DeValle, I'm lucky enough to serve as interim co-CEO of Americans for the Arts. I'm a middle-aged white man wearing glasses and a blazer, and over the course of today, each of our speakers will also offer their own visual description, and as you see, we do have ASL interpretation. If there are any other accommodation needs that would be useful to you to further your participation in today's webinar, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll do our best to accommodate. We at Americans for the Arts spend all day, every day, ensuring that our elected, appointed, and career colleagues across all three branches of the federal government think about the needs of the arts and culture sector and think about the way that the arts and culture sector can further their work. I'm just back from a couple of days in Washington, D.C., where my AFTA colleagues and I have been meeting with both the current folks in the government that are transitioning out, as well as the members of the transition team that are coming in as part of the next administration and Congress. And we're thrilled to have this opportunity to share some of that real-time on-the-ground intelligence with all of you today. In order to kick us off, I'm thrilled to introduce my colleague, my friend, AFTA board member and co-chair of AFTA's search committee, Christina Newman-Scott, who will offer you a few words of welcome, and then after her welcome, we'll dive into the meat of that. So with that, Christina, please add your voice.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It's wonderful to be here. Good afternoon, and welcome to Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund post-election webinar. My name is Christina Newman-Scott. I'm a brown-skinned woman with black hair pulled back into a bun. I'm wearing a tan jacket and really cute glasses. We're deeply grateful for your presence today as we gather to reflect on the recent elections and explore their potential impact on the arts. Our guest speakers and the team from Americans for the Arts are here to provide you with an informative analysis of the 2024 elections and their implications for the arts and culture sector. As we begin to move beyond a particularly intense election cycle, we acknowledge the range of emotions that this time may bring, from uncertainty to hope. We acknowledge, in the face of these challenges, it's crucial to remember the incredible power of the arts, our collective strength, resilience, and capacity for connection. While we continue to navigate the evolving landscape of federal policy as we look toward 2025, Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund remain steadfast in our commitment to our mission to build recognition and support for the extraordinary and dynamic value of the arts. Together, we lead, serve, and advance the diverse networks of organizations and individuals who cultivate the arts in America, ensuring that all communities, regardless of size or circumstance, have access to the transformative power of the arts. Next year marks the 65th anniversary of Americans for the Arts. Over these decades, we've learned that the strength of our advocacy comes from the powerful partnerships we build within the arts communities and networks across the country. Through these relationships, we highlight the economic, educational, cultural, and social impact of the arts, proving time and time again that the arts are essential to the fabric of American life. Despite the uncertainty of the times, we know that the arts are a constant source of hope, healing, and possibility. They connect us, challenge us, carry us forward. In 2025, we will come together once more with our incredible partners to advocate for policies and funding that will further strengthen the creative sector, an industry that contributes $1 trillion to the US economy and is celebrated by the majority of Americans for its undeniable influence on the quality of life in their communities. The election results may have reshaped some of the political landscape, but they also remind us of the power we hold as advocates for the arts. Our voices, united in purpose and passion, are more important than ever. Today, as we analyze the implications of these results, let's reaffirm our belief in the transformative potential of the arts to bring about positive change, especially in times of uncertainty. Thank you for being a part of this important conversation. Together, we move forward, united in our mission and inspired by the hope that the arts bring to our world. And it's now my great pleasure to hand it over to Nina Oslu-Tungeli, Chief Counsel of Government and Public Affairs and Executive Director for Americans for the Arts Action Fund. Nina?
Thank you so much, Christina, and thank you, Jamie. As Christina said, my name is Nina Oslu-Tungeli, and I wear two hats with the Arts Action Fund and with Americans for the Arts. And I describe myself as a Middle Eastern woman with black hair and a red top, and the Shepherd Ferry Arts Vote artwork behind me, guiding us through this election. I want to break down how today's speakers are going to be talking to us, as you've already received the welcome from Jamie and Christina. Along with myself, I will be joined by Bill Harper and David Reed. These are our two outside firms who provide guidance, advice, and hope for us to get through every legislative cycle, every new administration. And I think you're going to find their information very educational, insightful, and helpful. And then after that, the three of us are going to cover White House issues and the lame duck period of Congress, which is that period after the election in November until the new Congress, 119th Congress, is installed and sworn in on January 3rd. So there's this like 6-week period where 7-week period where you have newcomers coming. They're getting settled in their new offices as we speak, but they don't have any voting rights. And so work can still get done. And we're going to talk about that. After that, Tushar Swain is our public policy director at Americans for the Arts, and he is going to go into detail over Senate issues. And then he will be joined afterwards by Olivia Tarpley, who is our public policy manager, who's going to focus on what the election impact has been on the House of Representatives and what it means for the arts. And we will round up with Jay Dick, our Senior Director of Advocacy and Partnerships at Americans for the Arts, to cover the state impact on the arts in terms of elections, ballot initiatives. And then finally, we actually are going to have a couple of surprise guests at the end. We're waiting for the video to be uploaded. But Ben Brown, who is the chair of the Alaska State Council on the Arts, will be introducing a video that he was able to secure from his senator, his friend, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. She's a Republican who is going to become the chair of the Senate Interior Appropriations Committee that has oversight of funding for the NEA and NEH, among many things. For the last couple of years, she has been the Republican minority leader in that subcommittee, with Senator Merkley of Oregon being the chair, but now she will come back. She had once been chair. She's a wonderful supporter of the arts, and we're lucky that she will be steering the helm there. And Tushar will be able to talk more about that. So if we could go to the next slide. I want to let you know how you can ask questions today. There is a Q&A box when you bring your cursor down to get the Zoom toolbox. You'll see one for Q&A, and people have already, I can see, have already been adding questions, and that's the right place to put it. Those questions will come to us as panelists to try to be able to incorporate it into our talking points in advance or take care of it during the separate Q&A for each section. If we don't get to your questions today, don't worry. Our Olivia Tarpley is going to follow up to be able to get back to you with that. And if you think of questions afterwards that you couldn't get into the Q&A, take down Olivia's email address there, and she is the right person to circulate the question to the right person and get an answer to you. And there she's put it into the chat as well. And then finally, don't worry about having to take pictures of every slide and when are you going to get it and we're going too fast. Here is the magic URL for the slides that you are going to see today. Also the new video that's going to be posted from Senator Murkowski. A lot of good stuff on these two landing pages. They are identical, so you can just use the one from the Action Fund or the one for Americans for the Arts. Okay, now let's get into the content. So I'm going to first talk about the presidential vote. a lot of things that we already know, but I want you to focus on the top line of the popular vote. This is the latest as of today, and it is still changing. There are some states, especially in California, some districts that have not finished hand counting. Sometimes when elections are really close, the challenger can ask for a recount and it's done by hand. Sometimes they start off by hand. There are a couple of super close elections still happening that are at the House level going on in California. But as of today, this will not change the outcome of the presidential election. It's just letting you know that the numbers are ticking away and changing as other areas count them up. So here you had Kamala Harris getting a little over 74 million, and Donald Trump for the first time getting the majority of the popular vote with 76.9 million. Now, this is a lower turnout than 4 years ago, but it is a better popular vote for President-elect Trump, winning not only the majority of the popular vote, but winning it by 2.6 million. So it is a substantial and convincing win. And if we go to the next slide, some other components that show that, where President-elect Trump feels he now has a mandate, and he has a lot of political chits that he can call in because he helped with a few things, and I'm going to identify them. First of all, as a total electoral votes, 312, more than enough than what he needed. He won all 7 swing states that were heavily campaigned in. Advertising went into, outside groups put a lot of money into those and for a ground game. And he was able to win all 7, albeit very, very narrowly. There is a very small margin of victory in those 7 swing states. But in the end, it's a win. And I already told you about the popular vote. And then the next bullet is that he definitely helped Senate Republicans win the majority control in the Senate, which they had lost several years ago. He also helped Republicans retain the House majority, although very, very small margins. And the more that President-elect Trump picks a House member to go into his cabinet, that is a seat that is lost, which is making the margin even more narrow. When you have such a narrow margin in the House, it's not really quite a majority because one person can be out sick and then all of a sudden they don't have enough votes to make something pass. And I think Olivia is going to go into more of that detail. He is going to govern his policies that he wants. Some believe, and I'm one of those, some of them are very, very extreme, because he feels he has the GOP trifecta, which means he's got control of the White House, the Senate, and the House. I think it's going to be a honeymoon period where he's going to get what he wants, especially on tax policy issues. I also think especially on immigration issues. But once it starts coming to money and pork going back to states and districts, he might start to see a slide. But we'll get into that in a moment in our panel. And at the moment, in terms of how he is appointing his nominees, they are strictly based on how loyal they are to him. And he's not afraid to say that. They are indexed by their loyalty. We've already seen one drop off today with Matt Gaetz, who was nominated to be the Attorney General. He gave up and he said, I'm taking way too much attention. He also didn't have the Senate votes to get it passed. And he dropped out of the Attorney General thing. I think a lot of people are happy about that because he just was not qualified and he was under investigation for some very undesirable accusations. And then finally, something that President-elect Trump has at his disposal as a tool is reclassifying civil servants who theoretically have a very secure long-term job. And if any of them have some kind of policy responsibility in their position, he can turn them into something called Schedule Fs, which is a personnel term of what kind of classification that they have. And what it means is that he can fire them at will at that point. So again, this is a way to ensure that the people who are in policy positions, whether they're political appointees or civil servants who are reclassified, are following his directions, his instructions on what he wants to get done. He doesn't want a lot of people giving him pushback. He wants a way to get to yes instead of how it has to be no. So with the next slide, what are some of those big priorities that he wants to make sure it gets done? We're talking about large-scale deportation of illegal immigrants. He knows he's got a problem here because the Homeland Security has already said there's not enough money in the budget, in the government's budget, not just their own agency's budget, to be able to handle that, to keep them temporarily in some kind of surveillance and then deport them. So one of the new plans that President-elect Trump has is he wants to utilize the defense for that. And at a meeting with Congresswoman Betty McCollum, who is the Democratic leader on the Defense Appropriations Committee, she answered that question and said that we don't know exactly how he wants to use it. We just know that it could be a component, and we'll see to what extent. But he can't just use them to round people up and things like that. Maybe they use the planes to deport them, things like that. So soon it will be seen. He definitely wants to finish that wall with border security. And he's going to get the money from Congress. They're all abiding by him on that. Something that is more disruptive in many ways is the groundbreaking work that happened during the Biden administration and actually throughout the entire country through example of what the federal government was doing under the Biden administration was all of the diversity, equity, and inclusion policy work. The incoming Trump administration absolutely wants to get rid of all of that work that was done. And that will be, they're already figuring out where it exists in every federal agency through the transition committee and through their outside committee that's working on transition, so that they'll be ready on day one to sign a series of executive orders on that front. So I want you to be aware of that. He obviously wants to improve the economy. He ran on a campaign of everyday food prices being too high. So we're going to see what he can do to influence that from the White House. The biggest thing that he promised corporate America is to renew the tax incentive policies that he got passed during his first administration. Those are all due to expire in 2025. So that's why it was imminent on his, in terms of what he was saying on the campaign, to get reelected, because the Biden administration probably was not going to renew most of them, but they would have renewed some of them because there are some good things in there. But he also wants to add a few others, like he made a pledge on the campaign trail that he doesn't want to tax people who earn tips and no federal income tax on the tip portion of their income. And he also made a campaign pledge to not tax seniors' Social Security income. So all of this costs money. It's going to take away money on discretionary programs, and that includes the arts. And we'll have a little discussion about that in our panel. And then finally, his proposal to offset all the money he's going to spend to do all these things that were above the last bullet is he's going to raise billions of dollars, quote unquote, billions of dollars by applying tariffs to imported goods, especially those from China. It's going to apply to a few other countries, but it's very much going to target China. So let's go to the next slide. And I wanted to kind of say, in terms of how this might apply these philosophies that he has on arts related things. So what I want to say first is, as the organization that you represent, that you might be a board member of, that you might be a director of, or that you feel passionate about an arts organization. Support these groups and make sure you stay true to the values and needs that you have that are unique to you and supported by your stakeholders and community. All because there's going to be this chaotic, seismic change happening in Washington. It doesn't mean you have to change what your values are and needs are. You have to know what's happening in Washington. You have to know how it might impact your state, because you might have a governor who wants to follow the same lead as President-elect Trump. So it's important to understand what's coming down the pike. Jamie said at the beginning that he and me and others are in conversation with not only those currently in the administration under the Biden administration, but we're very lucky to have some people that we are close to who are actually part of the Trump transition and specifically working on the arts issues. So here is some feedback that we've already gotten. I've already told you right from day one, the first thing you're going to see is a discontinuation of DEI policies and programming that happens at the federal cultural agencies. But it's not limited to the federal cultural agencies. It's going to happen from the Department of Defense, Department of Labor, EPA, go down the list. Every single federal program and agency is going to be adjusted on this front. And it's going to be done by executive order. It does not have to change legislatively. But I will tell you that there are several very conservative social writers that have attempted to be added to remove this kind of DEI work over the last 4 years that did not pass. But those kinds of things are going to pass now under this new climate. Next, in terms of a positive thing, we think that the cultural agencies are going to put a big focus on celebrating America 250, which is the sesquicentennial of America, 250 years anniversary that culminates in 2026. That is an area that is something that is near and dear to the president, members of his administration, campaign, and supporters. And so this is something that the current NEA and NEH were already involved in. I think you're just going to see a very stepped up level in this kind of work. The next area also the current administration was doing already, and that was broadening arts projects to reach more rural areas. You're just going to see it on hyper mode in the incoming administration, assuming we get the budgets and we're securing the budgets for these agencies. Same true for the next area. NEA has been doing groundbreaking work in arts and military with veterans as well. And it's just going to be on hyper mode moving into the next administration. A slight twist on economic impact is not just talking about the economic impact on the community with number of jobs, income raised, things like that, but it's going to also do more of kind of what we did in the most recent AAP6 and talk about the human factor. Okay, so there's great economic impact. What does that mean at a human level for the residents of that community and within that state? Does that mean they have more choices of diverse art disciplines that they get to go see? Is it do they get lower ticket prices because of the economic impact? We're going to have to articulate that a little bit better. And I think that's a good thing, actually, and the way to go. And then finally, small businesses was an important feature under the Biden administration. It's going to be double that under the Trump administration, and articulating how all of our arts groups, whether we're nonprofits, for-profits, or individual artist co-ops, we're all small businesses, and we are contributors to the economy, and identifying ourselves that way, I think, is going to be important. So with that, I'm going to bring on our panel. And as I had mentioned earlier, it's David Reed with who is the policy director at Brownstein, who recently won an award as being one of the top lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Congratulations. And Bill Harper, who has his own firm, a partner at Harper Downey, but most recently, last year, was the longtime chief of staff for Congresswoman Betty McCollum, probably one of the best arts champions on Capitol Hill for the arts in America and for Native American populations, because she also chairs that caucus for many, many years. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to start with some questions. And so the first question I'm going to ask is to Bill. And it's regarding what's happening during this lame duck session, because we have some unfinished business with a continuing resolution to fund the federal government and all its programs and defense and agencies and things like that. It was supposed to be finished by September 30th because the new FY25 year begins actually October 1st, 2024. So we're already into it. And Congress had adjourned before the election to say, we'll finish it by December 20th. Can you tell us what the status is of that and what your best guess of options might be of what's going to happen?
Well, Nina, thank you so much. And it's great to join everybody today. I'm Bill Harper. I'm a older, pale white man, and I'm wearing a blue blazer and a blue check shirt. It's wonderful to be with everybody. And we are entering a period of uncertainty right now. No one really knows where this is all going with regard to finalizing the FY25 appropriation cycle. You're absolutely correct, Nita. The continuing resolution expires on December 20th. There are 12 appropriation bills that need to pass to continue the funding through the balance of fiscal year 2025. And the way it looks right now is we probably need to have some clarity from the leadership, from Speaker Johnson. It sounds like the Senate wants to move forward with negotiating, going to conference and start negotiations on finalizing the bills, but Speaker Johnson and the House need to agree. We probably have a few days left, maybe by Monday or Tuesday. We're going to have an answer if they are going to go to conference, because a $1.6 trillion worth of funding takes a long time for staff to do the work of writing the bill. If we are not able to pass an omnibus appropriation bill by December 20th, there will be a continuing resolution. Conventional wisdom is it's going to get kicked into March of 2025, at which point the Trump administration will be in place. There will be Senate, Republican control of the Senate, very tight Republican control of the U.S. House, but it will give Republican appropriators and the administration the opportunity to recraft the bills in focusing on their priorities. One of the reasons why an omnibus may likely not get done before the 20th is there are many policy riders in the bill that Republicans put in the House, negotiating with a Democratic Senate, a lame duck Democratic Senate. All of those riders would be stripped out. And as a result, that may not be palatable to a majority of Republicans in the House, and it would require Democrats to help pass that omnibus bill. And that's probably just something that President-elect Trump will not tolerate. So we should expect that looking to March. And the challenge of that is it will put Congress in a position of having the FY25 appropriation cycle undone at the same time as the administration is getting ready to put a budget forward, and the FY26 appropriation process has to start. Very challenging, very, very challenging. But we should expect cuts. We should expect quite harsh policy riders. We should expect the administration and the Republican majorities to put their prints on any appropriation bills moving forward as in the new calendar year.
David, I'm hearing a lot of headline news about what the new Congress, once they take over in January, they're going to administer something called the reconciliation process that has everybody looking up in their old rule books what that means. Can you give us a quick synopsis and how it would apply two different scenarios?
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Nina, and thanks for having me. The name is David Reed with Brownstein. I'm a 40-year-old white man with a gray suit and a floral tie and a blurred background in my office because it's a little messy. But yes, reconciliation is a legislative process designed to fast-track budget-related legislation in Congress when you have a House and a Senate majority as well as the White House, so the trifecta that you mentioned earlier. And it originated from the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, which allows bills to pass the Senate with a simple majority vote, so 51 votes, instead of the typical 60 required to overcome a filibuster. And it's limited to provisions that directly affect spending, revenues, or the debt limit, making it a powerful but fairly narrowly focused tool for advancing budgetary priorities. So here's how the process works. Congress must first pass a budget resolution. So again, this would be once they come into power next year, with the new Congress, the 119th, that includes reconciliation instructions, directing specific committees to propose changes to spending, revenues, or the debt limit. And these instructions set targets but leave details to the committees. So then those relevant committees draft legislation to meet the targets in the reconciliation instructions. For example, the Appropriations Committee might propose cuts to discretionary spending, while the Finance Committee could revise tax policies, et cetera. Then there is the process of combining the bills. So those proposals from the different committees are combined into a single reconciliation bill. And then there's generally expedited consideration, so that the debate is actually a smaller debate time, so 20 hours in the Senate. And there are restrictions on amendments ensuring a faster process. There is also the Byrd rule, which you'll likely start to hear about. Which means that it could, that is a critical constraint on reconciliation, which prohibits provisions that are extraneous to the budget. For example, changes that don't directly impact revenues or spending, or provisions that increase the deficit beyond the budget window, which is typically 10 years, can be removed. And then that limitation often excludes policy changes unrelated to fiscal matters. Now, most folks are foreseeing this first reconciliation package to include and be focused on the extension of those Trump tax cuts. That are set to expire at the end of 2025. But there could be some other things wrapped up in there, and there could be other bites at the reconciliation down the line. So implications for arts, humanities, and education funding. While reconciliation generally doesn't address specific line items like arts and humanities funding, broader budget cuts, like Bill had mentioned, can be enacted through reconciliation that can indirectly affect programs like the NEA, the NEH, arts education initiatives, et cetera. So, for example, there could be, if reconciliation imposes strict caps on discretionary spending, agencies like the NEA and NEH, which rely on discretionary spending, could face reductions. You could also have reconciliation that could reallocate federal resources to block grants for states, reducing direct federal support for arts and education programs. And then you could also have reconciliation reducing federal revenues through tax cuts. And those may increase pressure to cut funding from non-defense discretionary programs to offset deficits. So again, while reconciliation is not likely to directly legislate the elimination of funding for the arts, it can create an environment of austerity that indirectly threatens those programs. So again, the work of advocacy is that much more important and critical to ensure that arts funding and arts education is prioritized even in a constrained fiscal environment.
Yeah, and thank you for explaining it, because it's a very complex issue, but I think the main thing that people need to walk away with is that it is a weapon or a technique that can be used to indirectly affect discretionary funding while getting work done on what they want to do, because many of the Trump proposals are going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to take away from discretionary funds if those tariff funds don't really match up. I'm going to come back to you, Bill, and ask, arts groups have kind of, and we've been teaching them how to get community project earmarks for the last few years. If the continuing resolution is not resolved in December and it gets punted into 2025, you already mentioned that we could expect big cuts where the Trump administration puts their finger on it and says, we want a 30% rescission across the board, work it out. And then we have to be concerned that our chairs of those key committees take care of us. But what happens to earmarks? Because we know that the House wasn't allowing earmarks for the arts for the last couple of years, but the Senate has plenty of earmarks for the arts groups.
It's going to be at the discretion of those appropriation conferees to decide what goes into that final conference report. And there are going to be that gives them the ability to reduce funding, to increase funding, to eliminate community projects. They're going to have great discretion as they go through this final conference negotiation process. And there is some talk, although there's always talk. There could be a continuing resolution through the end of the year on some of these bills. So FY24 funding just gets continued. So this is a really wait and see, but I think David's point is really well taken. With so much uncertainty, advocacy and engagement has to be the priority. And for our arts and humanities community nationally, there are tremendous friends on both sides of the aisle. We have to work with those friends and make sure that the community's voice is heard, and that advocacy is really turned on, and people know where the community stands.
For both grassroots and grass tops.
Both, exactly.
Yeah. I'm going to do the last question, and it's going to go to both of you, and that is Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and the influence that they're having on the administration, the creation of what they're calling the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which, by the way, happens to be a cryptocurrency that they also own. So I don't know if they're helping the branding of that currency as well. They don't own it, but they have investments in it. David, at your firm, you recently had a roundtable of those that were appointed during the first Trump administration and those that were part of the campaign. And they mentioned that DOGE will actually not be a separate federal department, but serve as an advisory body to the Office of Management and Budget. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how big do you think their influence is going to be? And then I'll go to you, Bill, afterwards.
Sure. I mean, kind of back to the uncertainty of it. This is, kind of an unprecedented thing for, an incoming president to set up with the authority that it is that he's hoping that, that the two of them have. And the proposed Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, it appears to be driving kind of a dramatic restructuring narrative. The focus is, driving efficiency, looking at waste, fraud, and abuse. But really, it's looking to slim down and minimize the ability for certain agencies to be effective and to do their job. So you're going to see workforce reduction, centralization in some capacities, agency relocations. You'll also have the goal where they're going to be pushing folks to come back in person 5 days a week, again with the goal of shedding some of the workforce. You had already mentioned before rescheduling some of those federal workers to Schedule F, which would allow for them to be able to either push out or ensure that only those that are coming in are loyal to the president and his initiatives. And then aligning with Republican principles of smaller government overarching as the theme. Again, the feasibility is uncertain due to the bureaucratic and inertia of bipartisan resistance that you might see. And also some of the goals that they have stated and that Trump stated in his campaign rhetoric, things like eliminating certain departments. I think you'll see that they will run into some roadblocks on some of those, more draconian, proposals that I think they'll be pushing to the DOGE.
Yeah, and even running into communication cross wires within their own camp. So, Bill, for instance, Vivek Ramaswamy was on Fox News 3 days ago claiming he was going to eliminate the Department of Education. And then 2 days later, President-elect Trump nominates Linda McMahon to be the Secretary of Education. What kinds of things do you expect from this DOGE?
I think the strategy here is disruption. I think it is to create chaos, disrupt, overwhelm the system, and not let, I mean, Congress can take some action, but when Congress isn't equipped to fight a 20-front war. So much of this is going to be done by executive action, and it is a kind of a death by 1,000 cuts. So I think on some things they will succeed in advancing their agenda, other things they won't, but it almost doesn't matter because the collective action is going to be quite significant. It's going to be a tremendous impact on the federal workforce and those and the, you know, the talented civil servants who help keep the government working for the American people. There are other things. It's like turn off the spigot. They're going to cut funding to Ukraine. They're going to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, things that are going to reposition America in the world and also reposition America at home. So this is a real strategy of disruption, and it is going to take, which is again, going back to the point we've reiterated, advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. We have to demonstrate that the American people care about arts and humanity.
Thank you. Really great words of wisdom. We'll have you back for a webinar again. Thank you for participating today. And if you can take a look at that Q&A section, maybe there's some questions you can answer for us. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a breakdown of the House and Senate, and we're going to start with the Senate first with Tushar Swain, our public policy director, and then he'll hand it over to Olivia. And I will say I've taken up some of their time. We may be going over a little late, but I want to make sure they have enough time too. Tushar, please go ahead.
Thank you, Nina, and good afternoon, everybody. Could I see the next slide, please? Thank you. We can run through these quickly. Bill, David, and Nina did a great job of addressing some of these, but Congress will need to deal with the FY25 appropriations bill in one way or the other. The deadline, which is looking mostly like a continuing resolution. They'll need to do that by December 20th. The new 119th Congress will first convene on January 3rd. If you're in Washington, D.C., it's a good time to meet your members of Congress, because after they're swearing in, they often have receptions in their offices and invite anybody to attend. Congress certifies the presidential election results on January 6th, which will undoubtedly be a very emotional day because of the events that happened 4 years prior. Committee assignments and chairmanships will continue throughout January. A committee is a way that both the Senate and the House compartmentalize the work that they do. So the House Education and Labor Committee or Workforce Committee works on education, workforce, and labor issues. The Senate Appropriations Committee works on appropriations for that fiscal year, and so they will work on who their leaders are, as well as what those committee assignments are for all members of Congress. David did a fantastic job of talking about reconciliation. We would expect probably in January, mid-January, maybe a concurrent resolution for those reconciliation instructions. Then the presidential inauguration on January 20th, where President-elect Trump will be will become the 47th president of the United States. And in January will be our Americans for the Arts and Arts Action Fund webinar. Come back and join us as we go a little bit more in depth on policy issues and what we predict will happen over the course of the next year. Next slide. So now turning over to the Senate and the Senate elections impact. Most of you probably know that the Senate has flipped. It was this Congress 51-49 in favor of the Democrats. It will flip to 53-47 in favor of the Republicans. What I want to show you in this map is that only 3 states currently have senators from both parties. The rest either have 2 Republicans or 2 Democrats. So look at Wisconsin, for example, where Tammy Baldwin, a Democrat, just eked out her race. She joins Ron Johnson, who is a Republican. In Pennsylvania, John Fetterman became senator, a Democratic senator in 2020. There is an official recount right now going on in Pennsylvania, but it is expected that Dave McCormick, who in the first count was up by close to 17,000 votes, it's expected that he will be the next senator of Pennsylvania, and so you'll have a Republican and Democrat there. And then if you see in Maine where you have purple, that's because Angus King is an independent, but he does caucus with the Democrats. And in that state, he joins Senator Susan Collins, who is a Republican and a very strong arts advocate. Next slide. Just some fast facts. The Senate did flip with Democratic losses in Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Republicans held all incumbencies, but underperformed President-elect Trump in swing states such as Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Otherwise, that margin for the 119th Congress could have been much bigger for them. Looking ahead, because we are already in the election cycle of 2026, 33 Senate seats open in 2026. 20 are held by Republicans, 13 are held by Democrats. So to flip, Democrats would need to hold 13 seats and flip 3 more. They could potentially, lose some seats and flip more, but as you can see by that map earlier, that becomes harder and harder to do because of the partisanship of the country right now. Next slide. We wanted to acknowledge and thank, acknowledge some key arts champions who will be leaving the Senate. Senator Bob Casey, as we just said, there is an official recount going on in Pennsylvania. It is looking like Dave McCormick will win that to unseat him. Sherrod Brown and John Tester are both on the Senate Cultural Caucus, which promotes, enhances the arts and arts policies. Senator John Tester was very instrumental in some community arts engagement funding at the Department of Defense, as well as a strong supporter of the NEA Creative Forces program, which focuses on arts and military research, as well as community engagement grants. Next slide, please. So new Democratic senators in the 119th Congress, Ruben Gallego in Arizona, Lisa Blunt Rochester from Delaware, Angela Alsobrooks from Maryland, and Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan. Senator-elects Gallego, Blunt Rochester, and Slotkin come from the House of Representatives, so they do have a congressional record on the arts, and it is a good one. All 3 at some point signed on to letters to the House Appropriations Committee asking for increases in National Endowment for the Arts funding from the previous fiscal year. They both were on the right side of amendments that would have eliminated funding for the NEA and the NEH, and as well as amendments this year that would have severely decreased funding for the NEA and NEH. And then additionally, David talked a little bit about tax reform. Lisa Blunt Rochester is a champion of the Charitable Act, which would reinstate the non-itemizer deduction for for those who do not itemize on their taxes but wish to make a charitable contribution, which is 93% of Americans right now. And Senator-elect Slotkin is a co-sponsor of the Performing Arts Tax Parity Act, which would enhance the tax deduction for performing artists, which is now only income levels of 16,000 or less can take. So we have some good arts supporters coming into the Senate. Next slide, please. New Republican senators in the 119th Congress. Tim Sheehy, who beat Senator Tester, Bernie Moreno, who ousted Senator Brown, John Curtis, who will be taking Senator Mitt Romney's slot, Jim Justice, who will be taking Senator Joe Manchin's slot, and we mentioned Dave McCormick, who is expected to unseat Senator Casey. Senator-elect Sheehy, Moreno, and McCormick, this is their first stint in public office, so we don't have a congressional record for them. I did not hear them speak or mention of the arts during their campaign. We're certainly open and looking forward to speaking with them and their staff. Jim Justice has been an arts supporter as governor early this year. He announced 44 different kinds of arts grants, from arts projects to funding for arts centers to some arts education grants. He has a great secretary of arts, culture, and history in his state. And so we're hoping that he brings those arts vibes to Washington, DC. John Curtis is an interesting case. He certainly is more on the moderate side as it pertains to being a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which tries to work in a bipartisan fashion. He is a member of the Conservative Climate Caucus. However, he has voted on the wrong side of those NEA and NEH amendments that I had mentioned earlier. But hopefully his temperament seems like it's a good one to be able to at least have that open discussion and debate with him. Next slide, please. So new Senate Republican leadership. Senator Mitch McConnell has been the heart and soul of Senate Republicans for the last 18 years. He stepped down, which will actually have some implications potentially on the Senate Appropriations Committee, as it sounds like he wants to be a little bit more active. But Senator John Thune will be his successor, defeating Senator John Cornyn of Texas, as well as Senator Rick Scott of Florida, who is seen as the closest Trump ally of the three. But it is Senator Thune who wins. He has been a strong advocate of the non-itemizer charitable deduction, so we're hopeful for good things there. John Barrasso is the majority whip, which is the #2 leader in the Senate, also counts the votes for legislation that Republicans are interested in moving forward. And then Tom Cotton will be third, which is the conference chair, which is typically the communications wing for Senate Republicans. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about budget reconciliation. I think that David did a good job. I think the main thing that I'll just state here is that while spending matters can only affect mandatory or entitlement spending directly, as David said, there could be measures that put caps on government spending, which at that point, discretionary spending would be looked at as a potential target. And so while we'll continue NEA, NEH, Department of Education, all discretionary spending. The hope is that we will win out on those through a bipartisan effort of Congress, and much in the same way as we did in the years fiscal year 2017 through 2020. Next slide. And come talk to us again in January, as we'll go into a little bit more depth on the Senate Cultural Caucus, how that can be helpful to our arts policy efforts next year. But I think the main thing I wanted to point out here is that we have great bipartisan continuity right now in the Senate with Senator Susan Collins, as well as Jack Reed. Both work very well together, highly supportive of the arts. Next slide. You can see Senate Cultural Caucus membership. You can see where I highlighted those who will be leaving the Senate. So we will have some work to do in those states as well as others. I think that we certainly have some work to do on the Republican side as well. You will hear from Senator Lisa Murkowski at the end of our webinar, who has just been a steadfast leader, who's going to be the chair of the Interior Appropriations Committee that deals with NEA, NEH funding, as well as some of the other important arts programs as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Olivia to talk about the happenings in the House. Olivia?
Thank you, Tushar. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olivia Tarpley, and I am the Public Policy Manager at Americans for the Arts. I'm joining from my office wearing a leopard print shirt, and I have dark brown hair that's pulled into a bun. I'm seated in front of a bookcase with some art on the wall behind me. Like Tushar and Nina have said, today I'm going to talk about the House election results and provide some insights on key committees and members that have an effect on the arts. So like we've already established, Republicans kept control of the House and currently have 219 seats, and Democrats have 213 seats. Next slide, please. There are still a couple of races being counted, and those recounts will determine the remaining seats. So Republicans ultimately had a net gain of 1 seat, as some incumbents were defeated by a challenger from the opposing party. A couple of our arts champions had tight races. Congressman Ken Calvert of California has been a consistent supporter of the arts, and he's also the of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense last Congress. And he, like I said, has been supportive of the arts, especially community arts engagement funding for active duty military. Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur was also facing a tight race in Ohio. She's been a supporter over the years, and she won re-election. As a fun fact, she's also the longest serving woman in the House of Representatives. I then just also wanted to highlight a couple of new freshman members in the 119th Congress. There are too many to highlight, but lots of great history being made. Representative-elect Sarah McBride from Delaware is the first transgender person to serve in Congress. Representative-elect Julie Fedorchuk is the first woman to represent North Dakota in the House. That leaves only Mississippi as the only state that has not sent a woman to the House of Representatives. Representative-elect Nellie Poe is the first Latina elected to Congress from New Jersey. So like I said, these are just a few of the history after the 2024 election. So now let's talk a little bit about House leadership. So following the election, Republicans held their leadership elections, and Congressman Mike Johnson of Louisiana will continue to serve as the Speaker of the House. Most of the other majority leadership remains the same, with one exception. Congresswoman Lisa McClain replaced Congresswoman Elise Stefanik as conference chair. As I think we've mentioned a couple of times, several different House Republicans are being considered for cabinet leadership. And to date, President-elect Trump has already named Congressman Mike Walls of Florida to serve as National Security Advisor and Elise Stefanik of New York to serve as UN Ambassador. And shortly before this webinar, like I think Nina mentioned, we learned that Matt Gaetz of Florida withdrew his name from consideration as Attorney General. Given that he had already resigned from Congress, his seat will be filled by a special election. And this is the case for all seats that might be left vacant by presidential appointments. States have individual special election processes, most of which happen within 90 days of a vacancy becoming official. Filling vacant seats could ultimately take months, however, as the special elections are set by governors. Depending on how many House Republicans join the Trump administration, the House could have an even slimmer majority than they already do. And Speaker Johnson and the Trump administration are being mindful of the numbers, as of course they don't want to lose this already narrow majority. As the House majority does leadership elections right after the elections, the House Democrats completed their leadership elections, and overall things are remaining the same with House minority leadership. Representative Hakeem Jeffries will continue to be the House Minority Leader. Congresswoman Catherine Clark will continue to serve as House Minority Whip, and Congressman Pete Aguilar will serve as the Democratic Caucus Chairman, with Ted Lieu being the Democratic Caucus Vice Chair. So while we don't have time to discuss all of the committee assignments and intricacies within the House, I do just want to call a few members to everyone's attention, as we anticipate these 4 members will likely remain in their leadership roles as committee chairs and ranking members. So Congressman Tom Cole of Oklahoma is the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, and we have a strong relationship with Chairman Cole, and of course look forward to continuing this relationship in the next Congress. Representative Cole is a moderate Republican who is known for getting things done with support from both sides of the aisle. And the ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee is Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut. We have a great relationship with the Congresswoman and her staff, and we anticipate that she will remain the ranking member. Representative Mike Simpson of Idaho is the chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee on the Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies. And this is the subcommittee that oversees National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities funding. The congressman supports the arts and understands the value of the NEA and the NEH. He often references the value of the arts in rural America and spoke in opposition to a floor amendment in July that threatened to decrease funding for the National Endowment for the Humanities. Representative Shelley Pingree is the ranking member on this subcommittee and is extremely supportive of the arts. Not only is she the top Democrat for the Interior Subcommittee, again, this is the one responsible for NEA and NEH funding, but she also leads the Congressional Arts Caucus. And that leads me to our next slide. For those of you that might not be familiar, the Congressional Arts Caucus was started in the 1980s, and it continues to be supportive of pro-arts funding and legislation. The caucus, like I said, is co-chaired by Congresswoman Shelley Pingree of Maine and Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio. Representative Turner was just recently named the Republican co-chair, and he's a strong supporter of the arts. We have been told that he frequents arts events in his hometown of Dayton, Ohio, and has been a longtime supporter of the arts ever since his days as mayor of Dayton. So we are really looking forward to all of the ways that we can collaborate, not only with the caucus, but in the 119th Congress. And I'm now going to turn things over to my colleague, Jay Dick, to talk about the state and local impact. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Olivia. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Jay Dick, and I'm a middle-aged, white, gay cis man with short brown hair and a graying trim beard in a blue suit. I'm joining you from my home office, where I'm surrounded by books and a lot of personal mementos. including the painting over my shoulder of a boat and seaside house, which was painted by my grandmother. So I'm very happy with that. Next slide. While we are all focused on the federal elections, we also know that there were thousands of state and local elections this year, and unlike the federal races, they were not quite as dramatic. We find that the closer an elected official gets to the local level, the more they tend to work across party lines to find ways to provide good governance. This isn't to say that state and local elected officials won't try to enact controversial measures, but often they're much more thoughtful about doing so, and often the end result is not as extreme as when it started. State legislatures often change hands year to year. There are more swing states at this level than on the federal level, but overall, 2024 was a pretty quiet year overall. It was status quo for governors with minimal changes in the state legislatures, along with stable mayoral landscapes. But there was a few positive arts-related initiatives. So let's go into more detail. The 2024 elections were pretty uneventful for governor's offices, as the presidential years are actually, off years for gubernatorial elections. This year, there were 11 gubernatorial races, whereas in 2026, there'll be 36 governors up for election. There were no party switches in 2024, and no incumbent up for election lost. Governors were either reelected or succeeded by a person of their same party. If we compare gubernatorial elections since 2020, the field is still very stable, with only a net one increase or decrease for each party. You will notice that 6 states since 2020 have elected a governor of a different party, but again, none this year. I want to take a moment to say goodbye to some great governors who were strong art supporters and just welcome a new one. We say goodbye to Democratic Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, who is a great art supporter who's stepping down from the gubernatorial chair. In Missouri, we welcome former Republican Lieutenant Governor and arts champion Mike Kehoe as the new chief executive. A few years ago, then Lieutenant Governor Kehoe, during a mini-state reorganization, requested that the Missouri Arts Council be moved under his office, which has been a very positive development. Democratic Delaware Governor John Carney was termed out, but he also ran and won the position of mayor of Wilmington. So we look forward to working with him. And I should note that in 2022, we said goodbye to then Republican Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, who was another great art supporter. We will note that he had an unsuccessful bid for the Maryland Senate this year. Next slide. Unlike the governor's races, 2024 was a big year for state legislative elections, with 5,808 state legislators being up for election out of a total of 7,300. But even in all these races, the landscape remains stable. The most notable the most notable change was states with split or divided control of their legislature. In 2020, only Minnesota had a split control, meaning the House and Senate were of different parties. There are still some recounts going on, especially in Maine, but we will see more split governance, which is generally a positive thing, given that it encourages cooperation and negotiations, and again, less extreme governance. Only 2 state chambers changed party control following the 2024 election. Republicans won control of the Michigan House from Democrats and won at least a tie in the Minnesota House. The average number of chambers switching is normally around 8 to 12. So with 2 chambers switching, again, it was a pretty quiet year at the state level. But most chambers also saw minor changes to partisan compositions. Republicans recorded their biggest gains actually in Maine, Michigan, and Vermont. Republicans reduced the Democratic majorities in both the Maine legislative chambers, won control of the Michigan House, and broke the state Democratic's trifecta. Republicans also broke the Democrats' supermajority in Vermont. On the other side, Democrats recorded their biggest gains in Montana and Wisconsin. Democrats broke the Republican supermajority in the Montana House, picking up 9 seats out of 100, and also in the Wisconsin Senate. Just to shout out 2 great individuals here. I want to shout out and congratulations to former Oklahomans for the Arts Executive Director Julia Kirk, who will assume the position of Senate Minority Leader in next January in Oklahoma. And also I want to say congratulations to the former Vermont Arts Council staffer Zon Estes, who is going to be sworn in January as the state representative there. So let's all get involved in state government. Next slide. Let's now look at those states where one party controls the governor's office and both legislative chambers. We call this a trifecta. For this purpose, I'm going to count Nebraska as a Republican trifecta, even though they only have one state legislative chamber. And while they technically run nonpartisan races, in reality, the Republican Party is in control. Again, state trifectas have been pretty stable over the past 4 years, and as you can see from the chart. But Democratic trifectas in Michigan and Minnesota were lost as a result of the 2024 elections, but Republicans neither gained nor lost trifectas since 2022. I will note a slight increase in split or divided states from 2022 that went back up to 13. For comparison, if you look back to 1992, there were 32 states that had divided government. 10 is an all-time low record in modern history there. A little more interesting, though, veto-proof supermajorities statuses changed in 5 states. Democrats lost supermajority statuses in New York and Vermont, while Republicans lost supermajority statuses in Montana, North Carolina, but gained it in South Carolina. In total, there were veto-proof majorities in 29 state legislatures before the election. Post-election, there were veto-proof majorities in 26 legislatures, 7 Democrats, a loss of 2, and 19 Republicans, a loss of 1. Heading into the 2024 elections, 4 states had a governor of one party and a veto-proof legislative majority on the opposite side: Kansas, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Vermont. After the elections, Kansas and Kentucky maintained that status. North Carolina and Vermont lost that status, and no new state became a veto-proof legislature with an opposing party governor. I bring up these supermajorities and trifectas as in these cases where one party can truly push through more extreme legislation with minimal opposition. Generally speaking, when looking at good governance principles, when divided government is not available, avoiding supermajorities generally produces more thoughtful legislation. And as I switch to the next slide, you will see one example of how this can negatively affect the arts. As you know, the federal government has an important effect on the states. And I want to point out one potential concern for everyone's consideration. As you might know, the NEA has a 40% pass-through of its budget to the states. So each state receives approximately $800,000 to $1.2 million in funding for their state arts agency that the state legislatures must match. Currently, there are around 13 states whose state legislature provides either the minimum NEA match or close to it. I personally worry that sometimes it's just this match that encourages some state legislatures to provide funding for their state arts agencies, as they don't want to miss out on federal funding. But if that federal funding disappears or is dramatically slashed, I do worry that there could potentially be some states, legislatures, and or governors who decide not to provide funds for their state arts agencies. Therefore, we could see some states' arts agencies close. The last and only time in modern history that this happened was in Kansas in the 2010s, when then Governor Brownback defunded the state arts agency and stated that he felt that private funds should support that agency. It was an utter disaster, and after a couple of years, the legislature again started funding the state arts agency. So this is just one more reason that Americans for the Arts, the Arts Action Fund, our national and state partners will continue to fight for the NEA. Now, after that gloomy slide, go ahead and switch to the next slide, please. Let's look at some positives. When you look at funding for the nonprofit arts in America, the majority of these funds are invested by local governments. And by local, I mean counties and cities. Right now, just looking at the 35 largest cities in America, over $1 billion is invested by them to the arts. When you expand that to all 19,000 cities, that number will dramatically increase. This is followed at the state level with around $740 million being invested and $207 million by the National Endowment for the Arts. Each pot of funds are extremely important, but I make this point to emphasize how important your local elected officials are when it comes to supporting the arts and culture. This year, there will be 210 mayoral elections in cities with populations more than 30,000 and thousands of more in smaller cities, towns and boroughs across the country, with tens of thousands of city council members and county elected officials being elected. Each of these newly elected officials needs to understand the value of the arts. If you haven't already done so, make sure you reach out to any newly elected local officials, set up a time to meet with them, and talk to them about how the arts add value to your city or county. And if you don't know talking points, go to our website. We have some great talking points there for you. I do want to say goodbye to Carolyn Goodman, the outgoing mayor of Las Vegas, who was a great arts mayor. She will be replaced by Mayor-elect Shelley Berkeley, who is a former U.S. Congresswoman and actually received an A+ on the Arts Action Fund's report card. So welcome to her. And as I've already mentioned, the new Wilmington, Delaware mayor will be John Carney, who will be swapping out his role as governor for mayor. I will note that Americans for the Arts is proud to be a longtime partners with the United States Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, and the National Association of Counties, where we work with these groups and their members to promote strong arts policies and educate elected officials about the value of the arts and culture. And a special call out to members of the National Association of Counties Arts and Culture Commission, who I know are listening into this webinar. So thank you for being here, county elected officials. Next slide. In addition to electing people to office, I want to talk about some ballot initiatives which were approved by the voters. In total, there were 154 state ballot initiatives this year, which is up from 130 in 2020. Some of the top topics of these initiatives were abortion with 10 initiatives, 24 related to elections, ranked choice voting or citizenship requirements, etc., and 25 were related to tax and revenues. But there were 2 ballot initiatives that related to the arts, which both passed. And for comparison, this is an average number. 2 is an average number of state initiatives per election. Main question 3 provides $10 million to restore historic buildings owned by government and non-governmental organizations, passed with 51% of the vote. Rhode Island question 5 passed with 56% of the vote, approved $10 million to continue the cultural arts and economic grant program administered by the Rhode Island State Council of the Arts, which improves arts and cultural facilities. So congratulations to both of them. Going locally though, in Cuyahoga County, go ahead, next slide, please. In Cuyahoga County, Ohio, which is where Cleveland is located, they reauthorized a county sales tax on cigarettes to support the arts. It was first approved in 2006 and again in 2015. And to my knowledge, this is the only sin tax that funds the arts. So if you know of any other sin taxes, please let me know. But this is a very unique way to fund the arts. It raises the tax on a pack of cigarettes from 30 cents to 70 cents. And they do the increase because, fortunately, most people or more people are not smoking as much. It will raise approximately $160 million over 10 years to support artists and arts organizations in Cuyahoga County. So check out this link to learn more about the great work advocates did there in Cuyahoga County. And as I conclude my section, I would just ask that if you know of any other local ballot initiatives, please let me know. They're really hard to follow. So I appreciate your time. And just go ahead and email me those with those questions. And with that, I'm going to be happy to turn it back over to Nina.
Thank you very much, Jay. I'm coming on. Let me ask Olivia and Tushar if we have the video uploaded to be able to hear from Senator Murkowski.
Yes, hi. We do have the video from Senator Murkowski, and if everyone will just give me a brief moment, we will.
Is Ben here to introduce?
No.
Okay, so I want to publicly thank Ben Brown. As I mentioned, he is the chair of the Alaska State Arts Council. He is also the state captain for Americans for the Arts State Captain Network, Advocacy Captain Network, who help do a lot of grassroots and grass tops work to develop relationships with members of Congress. We typically bring him to Washington every year, but Senator Murkowski is someone who knows him very well, and he also runs a theater, and she comes to his theater programs all the time. She's someone who truly, really does love the arts, and goes to shows and things like that. So I want to thank Ben for getting that. And when the video is ready, if Olivia thinks it's ready, we'll show it. We'll be seeing it for the first time too. But the significance of it is that it's the person who holds the purse strings for the arts who's going to be talking to us right now. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, all. I'm happy to welcome you to today's webinar hosted by Americans for the Arts. As we know, AFTA has a long, proud history of bringing together Americans who believe in and support the power of the arts to make American lives better, strengthen our economy, and help us all live more meaningful lives. AFTA works with state and local partners like the Alaska State Council on the Arts and the Alaska Arts Education Consortium, which has helped bring the arts into classrooms throughout Alaska. By bringing arts advocacy organizations and individual advocates like yourselves together, AFTA helps to ensure the arts are part of all Americans' daily lives, bringing cultural, economic, social, and educational benefits to all. You'll have an opportunity today to learn more about how you can approach the challenges that lie ahead and how to effectively communicate the vital importance of public funding for the arts. Wish you all a productive conference. Thanks so much and take care.
So I want to thank her for that. At this stage, she probably doesn't have the ability to declare much more, but the fact that she knows about our network and that she is supportive of the arts, and she's gotten A+ records from the Arts Action Fund on our Congressional Arts Report Card for every year that she has been in office. And I believe that as long as she gets a healthy budget allocation, going back to what David Reed was talking about with reconciliation, where, you know, it's such a small allocation where she'd have to cut everything. I think that they would be a little bit more generous on the arts. We saw that
Hey,
happen.
Nina, this is Jay. Could you turn on your video, please?
Oh, sure. I guess that'll get people's attention. And when in this past year, the House was controlled by Republicans and the Senate was controlled by Democrats. And in the House, we had a phenomenal leader, and he's going to stay in that position. And that's Congressman Mike Simpson, who will be her counterpart on the House side from Boise, Idaho. And he has been a phenomenal supporter of the arts. He has gotten these terrible allocations on the House side, and he has had to make disproportionate cuts to many agencies, but he has only made minor cuts to the arts and humanities in his budget. And when it comes to conference, and he would conference with Senator Merkel of Oregon, the Democrat, he would go with Senator Merkel's higher number. And he would have done that this year too, if this bill had become an omnibus by December 20th. Still a chance, but unlikely. So this is just to say that I think we're in good hands with our chairmanships. And I think what we're looking at closely is what kind of allocation they're going to get. And in the past, the Senate used to get a higher allocation because it was controlled by Democrats, and the House would get a lower allocation. And so we would work on getting the House to adopt the Senate number, and we were successful at that. But if they both get terrible allocations, we have problems ahead of us. Okay, so let me say what we can do about it and where we start. We have a voter voice e-blast that you can send to and customize it with personal notes and stories to your members of Congress to try to get as much of that funding allocation for FY25 for the arts, because we have to deal with that before we can talk about future funding. We have to deal with FY25. So here is the link. And if you are inspired to take action, here's a way that you can do it right away. The next thing is we will be doing our first series of advocacy training sessions, 101, 201, 301, going down the list, on January 22nd. Just 2 days after the president is inaugurated, we will be furiously reading through probably a stack of executive orders that he will be signing on January 20th as soon as he takes over the Oval Office. And by then, it will be clear where the reshuffling of who is a member of key committees, whether it's for education or for the interior related to the arts, confirmation of chairmanships, ranking Democrat positions. We think we have it, but anything could change. There's going to be a lot of horse trading over the next couple of months. So definitely stay tuned for that. There'll be probably another voter voice action that you'll be able to take right away after that one as well. This is all getting us ready to handle some really big, heavy haul of advocacy for 2025. And with our next slide, finally, this will be a big topic at our AFTACON conference in person in Cincinnati, June 11th through the 14th. We're even going to have a kind of like a pre-Congress of our own to talk about policy issues, because it's not just about what is happening in Washington on Capitol Hill. We need to be forward thinking about where we want to go in the future, and whether we're starting at the local state level, what we can get done at the federal level. So please also join us at AFTACON. And we are trying to take care of as many of the questions as possible. I don't think we're going to get to them all, but we will answer them, and we will get back to those. We'll post all our answers, I guess, on our website, because they've been upped by others who are interested in knowing the answer too. So if you have more questions that you want us to answer, Olivia has shared her email address. Send it to her as a central location, and then she will get answers from all of us. I tried to answer probably 10 of them while others were speaking, and others did the same while I was speaking. So it's a big team effort here. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank all of our speakers, but really the work is going to be done by you. We had over 3,000 people register for this conference. Many of them who can't do it live will come back and watch the YouTube. That's historically what happens. And we just kind of have to all get on the same boat and row in the same direction, and united, we will be strong. So stay tuned for more. Keep your hopes high, and keep tuned to what we need to do next and when we need to. Thank you, and have a happy, happy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.